If you're not going to base your study on reading, tell me what you're going to do instead. Because Duolingo ain't going to do it, and just watching TV is not going to do it. Your Tuesday night French class isn't going to give you anywhere near enough exposure. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Story Learning Podcast. I've got to say, I'm a massive fan of today's question, which comes from CEO Grifster1, who asks, okay, Ollie, I'm all in with the story learning process, but do you still do a lot of activities like reverse translation or a lot of listening along with the reading? I mean, is it just all about the reading, and can I abandon my other methods and just focus on story learning? Right. So basically, to paraphrase this question is so Ollie's always going on about reading and the power of reading, but is that enough? Can I just read and become fluent? That's a great question. And I'm going to explore this topic today. And I'm going to tell you, the conclusion is that it's going to very much depend on who you are and your experience. All right. So there's not a straightforward answer. So I'm going to talk through this, and hopefully by listening to me talking through it, it will help you understand exactly what the role of reading is and how far it can take you. So I'm going to start off by just telling you what's behind, what's really at the core of the idea that you can learn a language through reading. By far the biggest job you've got when you are learning a new language is to acquire a huge amount of knowledge and information in that language, right? So to put it another way, you've got to know so much stuff in that language that you're able to speak. We often underestimate exactly how much there is in a language, how much you have to know. People really underestimate this, right? I think they think because there are apps that promise you can be fluent in 15 minutes, that you can learn a language just by learning a bunch of words, learning a bit of grammar, and hey presto, you're fluent. But no, there's a huge amount you've got to learn. There's thousands of words, there's all these different grammar conjugations. And then even beyond the stuff, there is the way of expressing yourself in the language. There's body language, there's all of these different things, cultural, there's so much to learn in a language, which is why any language really is a 5-10 year project minimum. So the biggest job of all when you're starting off with a new language is to accumulate a huge amount of knowledge and information, right? And most people will fail to get anywhere with a language simply because they will never accumulate that much information. They will never know enough stuff. Why? Because they try to, quote unquote, study their way through it. When you think about how much stuff there is to know in a language, the idea of learning vocabulary from lists or flashcards becomes farcical, because you're never going to be able to learn enough. The only way that you can acquire enough knowledge in a language to be able to use it well is by having huge amounts of exposure. Right now, the kind of gold standard for this would be going to the country and being completely immersed for years on end. Right, you'll have so much contact with the language that you will eventually, just by brute force, know so much stuff, or have so much contact that you will just know all these things and you'll be great at the language, right? But for most of us, that's not possible. And so we're working from a place of by default, we are in sort of second best territory because we're learning from home, all right? And so our primary job, to look at it from a very high level, is how can we immerse ourselves, expose ourselves to enough language so that we stand a chance of ever being able to have enough input coming in. And this is why reading is so important, right? When you read, you are exposed to huge amounts of the language. And that is the prerequisite to being able to then go on and speak it properly. My starting point here is, right, whether or not reading is enough to really get where you want to go in a language, start by showing me what you're going to do. If you're not going to base your study on reading, tell me what you're going to do instead. Because Duolingo ain't going to do it, and just watching TV is not going to do it. I mean, TV is kind of great, but you don't have the text in front of you that you can really engage with in a useful way, right? If you just listen to podcasts all day long, it's going to be too difficult for you. Your Tuesday night French class isn't going to give you anywhere near enough exposure. So what's your next best plan here? And I'm yet to find one, right? Other than, there are things you can do. So you can find a partner who speaks that language and doesn't speak your own language, and spend 24 hours a day with them and recreate an immersion environment of some kind. Yeah, you can do that. But reading is the thing that, if done well and choosing the right materials, has a chance of giving you enough input and enough exposure for you to learn that language. Right? That's my fundamental starting point. Okay. Now, the idea is, and this is the idea behind the story learning method, that if you base your language on reading, especially reading, I mean, in our case it's stories, but it doesn't have to be, reading material that is at your level, you can acquire enough, you can have enough exposure to the language in order to learn. And then from there, once you know stuff, once you have this vocabulary and grammar in your head, then you can speak, right? Because then you know the stuff, so you can actually speak it. And when you're being spoken to, you can recognize it, right? So the idea is that it's like it's your foundation on which you can build. And the question though is that enough? Can you just read and speak? Now, I think the basic answer here is no. It's not enough by itself. But what does this actually mean? See, for me, if I'm learning a new language and I just like base my entire method on reading, I know that I'm going to be able to learn that language and then go on to speak fluently eventually. But a big part of that is that I've been through the language learning process so many times that I know what to practice, right? I know how to practice these things. And so I'm going to be able to sort of self-guide my way through the process. I'll start by doing an absolute colossal amount of reading to acquire the vocabulary and the knowledge of the language. And then I will be able to go and do a lot of speaking practice later with friends, speaking partners, whatever. And I will know how to ask the right questions to fill in gaps in my knowledge. I've done it enough times to know how to do it, basically, right? But what I'm doing, even if I'm doing all of this by myself or if it's all self-guided, there is a phase alongside and after reading and acquiring all this knowledge where you need to both practice a colossal amount through speaking, but also interact with the language by asking questions and making mistakes to fix your knowledge, right? So you can do this all by yourself, and it can lead to the impression that reading by itself is enough. And it's like the counterfactual is still true, right? If you don't read enough, you're never going to get there, right? But it's also true to say that if you want to go all the way from starting a new language to speaking it fluently, you have to do a lot more stuff. And that, for most people who are not experienced language learners, which is almost everybody, is going to mean doing a lot more kind of practical exercises, such as some of the things CEO Grista one that you mentioned, activities like reverse translation, like maybe some written exercises and reading as well. You're gonna have to do all of these things for sure. This is what's also found in the literature. So there's a 2021 book by Light Brown and Spada, who are two very well-known authors on linguistics, and it's the 5th edition of How Languages Are Learned. And I thought I'd read out a paragraph from them which says, while there is good evidence that learners make considerable progress in both comprehension and production in comprehension-based programs, they're basically talking about like reading and listening there, we do not find support for the hypothesis that language acquisition will take care of itself if learners simply focus on meaning in comprehensible input. Comprehension-based approaches are most successful when they also include guided attention to language features, right? So this is very academic-y language. Basically what they're saying is reading by itself ain't enough. You're going to have more progress and more success if you also have a teacher there who is standing over your shoulder saying, you see this thing that you said here? Well, it's actually like this. And, oh, look at this grammar thing over here and how this works. You're going to learn faster. So to make this really simple, the most effective way of learning is to have a lot of input from reading and listening, but also help from a teacher to point out your mistakes. Right? That's the basic part. And this guided attention is the key, because there's a concept in language learning that is called noticing. Right? It's a simple word. It doesn't sound very grammatical or very academic, but actually it is one of the huge requirements for improving in a language. Because if you're able to notice a word here, a grammar point there, a pronunciation feature over here, if you're able to notice it for yourself, then you can self-study, you can learn by yourself, right? Because if you notice it, then you can fix it. I tend to see two different types of language learners, right? There is the first type who are very, very self-driven and perceptive and will notice things about the language and will improve by themselves. And then there's the other type of people who tend to be quite passive and standoffish in the learning process, and kind of, it's the type who will sit behind a desk and say, "Teacher, teach me," right? And kind of wants the teacher to just pass on all of their knowledge like a sponge, but it doesn't work like that, right? If you can foster the ability to actually notice things about language, and then you will learn by yourself, right? So this noticing is a key part of it. And that really, I mean, a lot of that's going to happen with vocabulary and grammar. And we actually have a little study worksheet that can be very useful for this. It's called the wonderfully named Grammar and Vocabulary Study Sheet. And we've made this to be very, like a very easy to use place to simply note down interesting words and phrases that you come across. And what it does is it helps you to bring this noticing to your learning. It helps you to be selective about what you're learning, things that you want to remember, and put a little bit more detail about them in a way that you can remember them. If you'd like a copy of this grammar and vocab study sheet, it's completely free. There's a link in the description. But it's being able to notice things, become aware of your own mistakes, become aware of people correcting you. This is a huge part of being able to take this foundation of reading and actually learn from it. So there are all kinds of other things that you will have to do on top of reading, right? And the question is whether you can do this by yourself or whether you get help from a teacher. But the kind of things that I will do in addition to reading is I will often have a teacher, and I'll have a teacher precisely because I want my mistakes to be pointed out to me. Right? The other thing I will do is have a lot of interaction with native speakers, spend tons of time with native speakers of the language. And that's kind of fulfilling the same role as the teacher, really, because if you interact with native speakers, what that does is it gives you the opportunity to try stuff out, to speak, right? And sometimes when you speak, some of it will work, some of it will fail. When it fails, that's an opportunity to learn if you can notice what's going on. I will sometimes use flashcards as well, although I tend not to use flashcards for single words. I tend to put complete phrases on there, and my flashcards really just act as a way, like a place for me to write this stuff down, so I can get back to it easy. But I used to use flashcards a lot when I was younger. I use them a lot less now, but they can still be useful. Things like giving a talk. I remember my friend Stu J. Raj, he always, when he was learning Mandarin, like one of the first things he did was sign up to give a TEDx talk in Mandarin. Like a year out, because he knew that having that there as something to aim for was going to be hugely motivating, and it's like a catalyst around which everything else can be learned. So things that are quite different from just reading, right? But things that you can do that will force you to get your act together, force you to prepare and practice stuff. And the other thing is activities like reverse translation, which again the questioner mentioned before, are just very, very direct, effective ways of manipulating language that results in learning. And I've got videos on reverse translation. We can probably link those in the description as well, so you can see what that means. But basically, like language activities. And what this really creates is a dynamic way. You're doing a lot of reading, which is how you accumulate the knowledge. Right? It's how you learn stuff. And then there are targeted activities with teachers, with doing talks, with flashcards, with other things that help you actually process the language, allow you to use it and make mistakes and self-correct. And so that's my general feeling. But I wanted to show you quickly how this relates to the story learning method as well, because I'm going to show you a graphic on the screen. You're only going to see this if you're on YouTube or Spotify watching the video here, but this is the story learning method right here. And it comes in 3 parts. And the reason I'm showing you this is because when I was creating the story learning method, what I've just described to you is exactly what was baked into that. So there are 3 parts to it, right? Immerse, learn, and activate. And it's like a big cycle. Immerse is where you begin learning through a story that's at your level. This is the reading part, okay? And obviously the key part here in the method is that it needs to be something that's at your level so that you stand a chance of being able to understand some of it, or at the very least, notice little features in the story. So we start by immersing. But as the question has pointed out, like, it's not enough by itself, especially when you're a beginner. And so the next thing we do is learn, and this is where we have a teacher come in and talk you through the story, point out different things about it, help guide your attention through that. And then after immersing and learning, then we move on to activate, which is where you actually try to speak and produce language using what you've learned. So first we immerse, then we study what we've just immersed in, and then we practice using that, and then we immerse some more. And this is kind of one big cycle. Now, does real language learning in real life in people's minds work in this very simple circular way? No, it never does. So learning is messy. But in order to have a repeatable process, like, we have to codify it to a certain extent, and so that's what we've done here with the story learning method. And if you take any of our uncovered courses, of which we have hundreds of them now in more than 15 different languages, that's the process that you go through right here within every module of the course. It's immerse, it's learn, it's activate. So, CEO Grifter, I hope that gives you like some insight into how I think about learning and the role how I think about reading and the role of reading overall in the language learning method. Again, if you'd like to get that grammar and vocab study sheet, that is probably the easiest way to start to transition from actually reading to noticing things by yourself. I'll get a link in the description there. But thank you for listening, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the Story Learning Podcast.